It's a place to work, a place to talk, maybe tell a story or two. It's a place to tinker with belief and ask what's good and true. There are things to keep and things to toss or see them differently. You'll find us in the Soul's Garage. Come share a laugh or three. The Soul's Garage, the Soul's Garage. Whatever your model of faith, let's question, ponder, wonder why on any path you take.
Hello, and welcome to the Soul's Garage. I'm Paris Donahue.
And I'm David Ezekiel, and we've opened the garage door to hang out with you and tinker with this vehicle called faith in order to keep it running smoothly in all of our lives.
This is the second in a series of episodes that we're calling Dubious Dogma for Life's Dire Experiences. We're calling it that, first of all, because we love the alliteration of it. It makes us sound very erudite. But the second reason is because we thought it sounded better than a title like, Say What? Or, That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. By dubious dogma, we mean that we're looking at the things that people say when somebody is hurting in some way, but what they say is about as helpful as a concrete parachute.
You know, that being said, most people don't have malicious intent when they say things like that. There are numerous reasons why they use these sayings, but they aren't what a person who is feeling distress or hurt or pain in their lives really needs.
No. If somebody is really hurting, what they need is a caring presence from somebody else, and we've said that in the previous episode.
So let's get into some of these. You know, like, God will never put more on you than you can stand. You ever heard that one?
Oh, yes, and I think most everybody's heard that one. Or how about this one? Try to be strong.
Yeah, I was going to say, why can't I be weak sometimes?
Yeah. Or another one is, how you holding up?
Yeah, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
What does that really mean?
We'll get into that. Yeah. We'll examine the problems with each of these in a moment, but for now, let's just say that they're designed to couch human suffering in terms of a test. That somehow or another you're facing a test from God, and that's why you're going through all of these hurtful times of grief or pain or whatever it may be.
You know, because people like to say, God will never put more on you than you can stand, and that it's from the Bible. And actually, it's not exactly phrased like that in the Bible. No, you can find that over in the New Testament in 1 Corinthians 10:13. I believe it is 1 Corinthians and not 1 Corinthians.
Depends on which side of the pond you're from.
Oh, okay. But there it's really what that scripture verse references and alludes to is that it's all about the context of temptation, not in the hardships and burdens of life. And so I'd kind of like to tell you the story. It makes me think of Brian Heiss. You got a minute that you can hear this story?
Sure. I'm not going anywhere.
Oh, okay. Well, every once in a while I
Just
feel like...
wake me up when you're done.
Oh, see look what I have to put up with, all right? A young man in Utah, and his episodic adventure has been recorded in the Encyclopedia Britannica of all things, and even been cited in a couple of books. It says, the story is that he woke up one morning because the plumbing in the ceiling was leaking and water was hitting him in the face. And so he got out of bed and found that water was already ankle deep on the floor. And so he called his landlord, and his landlord told him to go rent a water vacuum and get the water up before it ruined his property. And so the young man rushed out to his car only to discover that he had a flat tire. thinking he'd better call for some help, he ran back into the apartment, sloshed through the water, and picked up the phone, which back in 1982 was attached to the wall, and it carried a small electric current, and the current shocked him so badly that he fell backwards and he ripped the phone off the wall. Now, by that time, when he came to, he really knew he needed to get some help, so he decided to go back down to his car. And when he tried to get out the door wouldn't budge because the water had made it swell into the frame. So he screamed at the top of his lungs until someone came along and kicked the door in from the outside. And so by this time, Mr. Heiss runs down the stairs only to discover that somebody had stolen his car. Knowing that there was only a small amount of gas in it, he ran down the street a few blocks and found it sitting right in the middle of the road. Now, some good Samaritans, good passersby helped him push the car back to his apartment. And finally, he got the water turned off. He got his flat fixed, and he got gas in his car. And now, by that time, he had to hurry to make it to his ROTC graduation ceremony. And grabbing his bayonet, he threw it into the car and ran upstairs to get dressed. And when he came back downstairs to get in the car, he hopped in, forgetting that he had left his bayonet in the driver's seat of his car. And he sat down on it. And minutes later, he found himself in the emergency room of the hospital, let's just say getting strategic surgery. So he gets that taken care of, trudges back to his apartment, opens the door, and saw that that the water had softened the plaster in the ceiling, and the ceiling had fallen and toppled over onto his pet canary's cage, and it killed the bird. And so he sees that, and he decides he's going to run over and to see see if he could take care of that canary. And as he ran in, he slipped on the wet carpet, fell backwards, and injured his back. And once more, this poor guy finds himself in the hospital emergency room. Now, by that time, a reporter had heard about this and caught up with him, and the reporter asked him and says, "How can you explain a day like this?" And the only thing that our young man could say was, "Well, it looks like God was trying to kill me, but he just kept missing."
Now, that's some dubious theology if I ever heard it, but it makes for a great story.
That's a great story.
Yeah, right.
While it's funny, it's just not the case here.
No, it's not. It's not.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of funny, but to some extent, for that young man, what he was going through was an ordeal that day. And that whole episode was weighing on his shoulders. But the aspect is, though, that there are those soul-crushing experiences that sometimes we all feel. And, it's just we're so weighted down by what we're going through that, we just say, oh, gosh, this has been such a test. Like Job had to go through just one thing right after the other. And it was a test for Job, and so I guess I'm having to endure that myself.
Yeah, which really, if you look closely at the book of Job, a book that, by the way, the rabbis always use the word problematic to talk about, you got to remember that the book of Job is not really a story about Job being tested by God. It's really a book about relationships. Mm-hmm. It's about relationship with yourself, relationship with others, and, of course, a relationship with God. Job's friends, and I put that in quotes, mm-hmm. Which I think we said before, the best thing they did was just to not say anything for the first few days. Mm-hmm. But when they started opening up and saying stuff, what they said was, Job, this is all your fault. They were blaming Job. Now, so many people in our culture, in our day and time, would not be that crass. We would we have to say something else that sounds much better, and so we say things like, "Well, God will not put more on you than you can stand." But that's really another way of saying, you're being tested, and the underlying point of that is that you're suffering this because your faith or your commitment or your lifestyle or your choices or whatever word you want to put in there is not matching up with what God wants and needs shoring up in some way. And that's why you're being tested. And we think that that's a very dubious dogma, and particularly dubious if you're going to try to make it out to be what's happening in the book of Job.
Oh gosh, yes. And when you read the book of Job as being about relationships, all of a sudden the book of Job makes a lot more sense.
Yep.
But there are things though in life, sometimes they do occur for a reason. There are things that occur because they that there's a cause and effect to it. And sometimes it's my fault for what I may have done, and all of a sudden I have consequences for that.
You want to give an example?
Well, it's like Brian Heiss. I'm not going to give an example about
That's what
about me.
Okay, then moving on.
If
you're not going to dish on yourself, then let's just keep going.
Well, it's I can't cite a good story right now. For one reason, I don't want to.
Fair enough.
Well, all right. It may be, like one example of cause and effect may be I was speeding down the highway, and all of a sudden these little lights from the state trooper came on and pulled me over and gave me a ticket. And he asked me how fast I was going. I said, well, really wasn't paying that much attention, but I guess I was going pretty good if you come to get me.
Yeah. Like a truck driver I heard about one time, a true story, got pulled over by the police for going 90 miles an hour in an 18-wheeler down the highway. And the policeman said to him, says, "You know how fast you were going?" He said, "No, sir." He says, "I clocked you at 90 miles an hour." And the truck driver said, "Man, I was really booking, wasn't I?" That's cause and effect.
That's cause and effect.
That's right. He couldn't say, "Oh, why? I wonder why God did this to me."
Or one more about speeding is like one guy I know in South Carolina. He was flying down the interstate, and the state trooper came and pulled him over, and the guy rolled down his window and he said, "Stupid thing, was I speeding, officer?" And he said, "Mister, 95 is the route you were on. It ain't the speed limit sign." But sometimes things do occur. It is cause and effect, and sometimes things in life just happen. In the words of that famous Alabama theologian, Forrest Gump, who said, "Sometimes manure just happens." To say that your hurt and your ordeal is because it's being inflicted upon you from some external outside force really is a dubious theological presumption.
Yeah, it's a convenient way to hold suffering at arm's length so that you don't have to deal with it. Because so oftentimes when somebody else is in pain, that brings up your own pain. Yeah. And we human beings don't like that. And so we come up with these deflections like that as a way of saying, well, I don't want to deal with my own pain, so I'm going to somehow or another push yours aside by one of these dubious dogma things.
It's just saying some things like that. It just simply implies that the wounded person is somehow to blame for their own suffering. And that's just not helpful at all. Sometimes, really, manure just happens.
Yeah, even in Job, and we can't seem to get away from him in this episode. Even in Job, even God comes to his aid at the right time. So I mean, how is that somehow Job's fault that he's going through all this?
Yeah, especially when the Almighty shows up and tells Job, "You have spoken rightly of me, and your friends have not."
Right.
And that's pretty impressive. And God comes to Job and says, "Now you didn't get everything right yourself, because you did make some presumptuous statements, but I understand your suffering and your pain."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The dubious dogma of saying it's your fault implies that your faith isn't very strong if you have days when you feel like you just can't go on anymore. Problem with that is that that's the human condition. We all face days when we just don't feel like we can put one foot in front of the other one more time. But somehow or another, we have to find the strength to go on. So what the scriptures would say, and what I think good theology would say, is that it has nothing to do with my stamina. It has everything to do with God's grace.
That's pretty wise. Well, say that again.
I don't know that I can.
I think it's worth repeating.
I'm only allowed one wise statement a day. I'm just saying that the statement of saying or implying this is your fault implies that your faith isn't very strong if you have days when you just can't put one foot in front of the other, when you just feel like you can't go on anymore, but somehow or another, you find the strength to do it. That whole thing about and when somebody is hurting has really nothing to do with stamina, but it has everything to do with the grace of God. That in the midst of the pain that we suffer, God is in the midst of that, giving us that ability to put one more foot in front of the other, even when we think we can't.
And then would you say that phrase, try to be strong, is that a denial of saying that I don't need God's grace to help me get through some of that? That's a good theological point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He is kind of smart every once in a while.
Yeah. As long as I take my pill.
But that is that's a good sermon topic. I think I'll preach on that. I'm glad I thought of it. But
a good preacher's a good thief. Yeah. Well, that try to be strong is really just a variation on the God will never put more on you than you can stand. What it really means is that, your pain is making me uncomfortable, so I want you to act like you're okay, and therefore I won't have to deal with your pain, and then I won't have to deal with mine.
Mm-hmm. And same way with that phrase, how you holding up? That sounds like an expression of concern, and it could be, but what does holding up mean?
Yeah.
I mean, what does it actually look like?
Yeah.
And if I'm not holding up, should I feel guilty for being weak or feeling weak? And actually going back to Job, I mean, we just can't seem to get rid of him.
Get rid of Job.
That's what one of his friends was asking him basically is, how you holding up, Job? And Job said, well, I'm not doing so great. And it was, well, Job, you ought to be holding up. I mean, this is all about you. It's your fault. Be strong. But, that really comes back to that aspect about it's not about my stamina. It's all about God's grace.
Yeah. I remember old Fred Craddock, who's one of my heroes in the pulpit, told about when his mother died, and typical Southern fashion, people were gathering at the house, and as only Craddock could talk about, this woman came in with a big old black Bible that weighed about 50 pounds, I guess. And he says, "Oh, isn't it wonderful? She's now with Jesus. Isn't this just great? This is a day to celebrate." And Craddock looked at her and says, "Pardon me, but my mother has just died." You know, I mean, what she was doing was a variation on how you holding up, because it was a way of deflecting the pain that was there. You're not supposed to feel this way, and so if you do, then you should feel guilty. Shame on you for feeling sad that your mother has just died.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's exactly right. It is a variation on that same theme. You know, and another statement that I've heard is that takes this discussion in a totally new direction.
Right, it does.
I know how you feel. Really?
Really?
You know how I feel.
Right.
I mean, you know, like Craddock was saying, "Pardon me, my mother just died."
Yeah.
And you know, I'm hurting here. And you want to come in with all these pious platitudes. And oh, how wonderful it is, you know, and trying to sing so lyrically. And I'm sorry, that kind of stuff just falls on deaf ears, because it may not sound like Dubious Dogma, but it's shot through with theological as well as psychological implications.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's so often the case, it too is a deflection. I'm uncomfortable with your pain, so let's make this all about me. You know, How many times have you've seen somebody pouring their heart out, and the other one says, well, let me tell you what happened to me. You know, that's not what somebody needs at that point in time.
I know. I mean, it may have something worse may have happened to you, but not right now. Right. I mean, you may have been hurt 6 years ago, but this occurred to me today, or something like that, or it's going on right now.
Yeah.
Well, we could really go on with that kind of stuff. I mean, this is what happens when you get a couple of preachers engaged. I mean, we could go on and on and on and
and we have.
And we have. But we've probably reached that point in our podcast that it's becoming painfully clear. Particularly to our listeners and viewers. And so I guess we might need to say our time has come to an end.
Yeah. Like Mark Twain said, I think it was Mark Twain said, the mind can only absorb as much as the seat can endure.
Yeah.
So this whole one-upsmanship idea is rather intriguing. And
I got a quote I can beat that. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh yeah, let me tell you.
let me tell you. But this quote about one-upmanship or this topic, that really is intriguing.
Yeah, we'll pick it up another time.
Yeah.
Just remember that just because you're hurting or you're struggling doesn't necessarily mean that it's your fault. Like David was saying, quoting that great Alabama theologian, not him, but another Alabama theologian, manure just happens. Sometimes it does.
And before it gets any deeper in here, let's close the garage door.
Well, that's good, because Mama's calling us to the house for supper, so it's time to do that and to head inside. So until next time, I'm Paris Donahue.
And I'm David Ezekiel. And we'll see you soon again here at the Soul's Garage. The Soul's Garage was written and recorded by Paris Donahue and David Ezekiel. Boy, they're talented.
Our theme song was written by Adam and Brady Beard and Paris Donahue, and two of those three are pretty talented too.
We'll let you figure out which two they are as they're playing in the background, and that would be Adam and Brady Beard, who performed and recorded the music for us.
Our podcast cover art was designed by the multi-talented Nancy Arndt.
And Kurt Reply is our Director of Public Relations.
Follow us on Facebook and Instagram and maybe TikTok when Elon figures out what he's going to do with it, or whichever social media outlet wastes the most time for you.
And let's face it, wasting time on a podcast with us is a great utilization of your time.
Yeah, right.
Send us your comments to thesoulsgarage@gmail.com.
And the Soul's Garage is a production of Two Old Geezer Studio, same as last time.
All right.